She didn't even realize her hands were trembling until the radio cut through with that voice. SEAL Team Alpha, Commander down. Immediate backup required. Why did her chest tighten like that? She had heard calls before. Urgent. Desperate. But this one, it struck deeper, like something inside her already knew the weight of it. Elise Grant froze for only a fraction of a second before moving. The desert sun blazed down on forward operating base Falcon, shimmering heat bending the horizon, but all she felt was the sudden chill that ran through her spine. Grant, this zone is hot with entrenched fighters, her squad leader warned. Then that's exactly where we're needed, she snapped back, voice sharper than she intended. Was she reckless, or simply unwilling to stand still while others bled? The thought nagged at her as she grabbed her rifle, tightened her vest, and gave the only command her squad needed. Gear up, we're moving. She had been with the 75th Ranger Regiment long enough to know what this meant. A SEAL commander pinned, bleeding, ambushed. Those weren't just words over comms. They were echoes of chaos, cries from men holding the line with everything they had left. Elise's job was clear. She wasn't going to let them die alone. But something else stirred beneath her calm surface. Something she didn't want to admit. The fear of losing control. The fear that one bad call, one wrong turn, could mean not only failure but her men, her family out here, never making it home. Her weapon felt heavier than usual as she checked the chamber. Why now, she thought. Why this mission? No answer came. Just the pounding of rotor blades as the helicopter waited. The minutes blurred, gear checks, ammunition counted, orders barked. She moved with precision, but her mind raced with fragments of doubt. You can't save everyone, Elise, not this time. The voice on the radio replayed in her head, steady, professional, but cracked with urgency. Someone's leader was down. Somewhere men were clutching their rifles, teeth grit, praying reinforcements would come before it was too late. She had trained for this exact call. Years of marksmanship, tactics, conditioning that stripped away hesitation. Yet underneath the drills and discipline, Elise was still human, and humans bled, humans broke. She glanced at her squad as they mounted up. Lopez, the automatic rifleman, cracking a nervous joke as always. Walker, her point man, checking and rechecking his optics. Corporal Lane, youngest of the bunch, trying to look braver than he felt. They trusted her. They needed her steady. And so she buried the tremor in her hands, locked away the storm inside, and gave them the one thing they deserved, a leader who looked unshakable. Squad, she said, eyes scanning their faces. This isn't a drill, it's the real thing. We go in, we fight hard, and we bring our people home. No heroics, no hesitation, just us doing what we came here to do. They nodded, the kind of nods soldiers give when they know words are just armor. 15 minutes later, the helicopter lifted into the sky, slicing through the hot air. Elise sat near the open door, wind tearing at her gear, eyes locked on the map glowing faint green under her glove. The terrain was cruel, jagged ridges, shallow valleys, every angle an ambush waiting. 2 minutes to LZ, the pilot's voice crackled. Her heart slowed. The strange stillness came, that moment where fear and focus collided into something else entirely. She had felt it before. The razor's edge of combat where time bends and every sound sharpens. Gunfire cracked in the distance, faint at first, then rising. The closer they came, the clearer it was. SEAL Team Alpha wasn't just pinned. They were surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. She tightened her grip. They're still fighting, still alive, but not for long. Grant, Marcus Reed's voice came over comms. Your squad is assault element. Push straight through, crush resistance, secure the seals. A simple order, a brutal one, straight into fire. The bird jolted as bullets stitched the dirt nearby. The door gunner answered back, brass cascading into the clearing below. Go, 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 Elise shouted. Boots hit the ground, dust exploded. The squad spread out, rifles snapping to their shoulders. Immediate fire erupted from the hillsides. The enemy was dug in, clever and patient, waiting for them to land in the kill box. "Contact front," Lopez roared, his machine gun roaring back, drowning out the whine of enemy rounds cutting through the air. Elise hit the dirt, rolled, sighted. One insurgent exposed for a heartbeat dropped. She shifted, squeezed again. Another. But they weren't stopping. The hillside lit up with muzzle flashes. Every step forward was a gamble with death. "Base of fire, move by bounds," Elise commanded, voice calm, precise. She couldn't afford the tremor now. Every order carried weight. Lives depended on her words being sharper than bullets. The squad surged forward in controlled chaos. Fire, move, cover, advance. Her lungs burned as she sprinted across open ground, every breath heavy with dust and adrenaline. The world narrowed to sightlines and cover, the crack of rounds and the screams of her own name shouted through comms. Then Walker's voice cut in, urgent. "Grant, I've got eyes on them, the SEALs." Her pulse jumped. Status: 4 still fighting, pinned on 3 sides. Their commanders hit bad, real bad. Daniel Hayes. She didn't know his name yet, didn't know his face. Only that he was down, and without him, his men were cornered animals in a tightening cage. The choice came fast, brutal. Pull back, regroup, risk losing them all, or punch straight through the firestorm. She didn't hesitate, couldn't. "Squad," she said, her voice steady but fierce, "we're punching through. Full assault. Stay tight, stay sharp, we end this." It wasn't courage. It was resolve. The kind that doesn't come from wanting to be a hero, but from refusing to live with the weight of inaction. She surged forward, rifle blazing, boots pounding against the earth. The squad followed, shadows of her determination. Every insurgent position they broke was bought with seconds shaved off Alpha's dwindling time. The closer they came, the more the world dissolved into chaos. Dirt kicked into her face. Bullets sliced past. Grenades thundered. Her ears rang, but she kept moving, kept firing, kept willing her squad forward. And then there they were, SEAL Team Alpha. Faces streaked with sweat and blood, rifles clutched in white-knuckled grips, fighting with the last of their strength. And in the center, their commander slumped, pale, blood soaking through his uniform, eyes barely open. Elise dropped beside him, heart hammering. His gaze flicked up at her, unfocused but alive. "Commander Hayes," she said, voice quick but calm. "I'm Staff Sergeant Grant. We're here to get you out." He tried to speak but coughed, pain ripping through him. His men shouted, covering arcs, but the enemy pressed closer, relentless. For a moment, just a moment, Elise felt the storm again. The crushing awareness that one wrong call could end them all. That weight, that silence in her chest, screamed louder than the gunfire around her. But she didn't let it show. "Sir," she said firmly, meeting Hayes's fatting eyes, "we're pulling everyone, and that means you." Her hands worked fast, pressing gauze, securing tourniquets, while her squad threw up a wall of firepower. She carried his weight across her shoulders when the order to fall back came, every step grinding her bones, every breath a vow. Gunfire ripped the air. Lopez's machine gun thundered behind her. Walker's voice shouted bearings. Lane's voice cracked with fear and fury. But Elise didn't stop. Not until she felt the wash of rotor blades above, the shadow of salvation descending. "Bird inbound, 30 seconds," she shouted into comms. 30 seconds, it felt like forever. But they made it, every SEAL, every Ranger, and a commander who was supposed to die in the dirt, now strapped to a stretcher, still breathing. As medics hauled Hayes inside the helicopter, his hand caught Elise's wrist. His grip was weak, trembling, but his words carved themselves into her memory. "You saved us, you saved me." The helicopter lifted, dust swallowing the battlefield. Elise stood there, chest heaving, rifle heavy in her hands, and for the first time since the call came, she let herself breathe. But deep inside she knew, this was only the beginning. Why couldn't she sleep? The firefight was over. The SEALs were safe. Her squad had made it back with no losses. On paper, it was a success, the kind of mission that commanders highlight in reports. But Elise lay awake on her cot, eyes fixed on the ceiling of the tent, replaying every moment in relentless detail. The radio call, the sprint across open ground, the wounded man's hand gripping her wrist. His eyes, that's what stayed with her. The way they searched her face, desperate, grateful, almost apologetic. She had seen plenty of wounded men before, but this felt different, personal somehow. Don't get attached, she reminded herself. Soldiers weren't supposed to carry ghosts around, especially not living ones. But the memory wouldn't fade. The base buzzed with the rhythm of operations, a constant backdrop of voices, engines, and the distant thud of artillery. To most, it was noise. To Elise, it was proof that the war never paused, never gave anyone a chance to catch their breath. Sergeant Grant, Marcus Reed's voice cut through the tent flap as he stepped inside. Got a minute? She sat up instantly, boots hitting the ground. Yes, Sergeant. He studied her, eyes sharp but not unkind. You led well out there. Saved Alpha, saved their commander. You should be proud. She nodded, but pride wasn't what she felt. Not pride, not relief, something closer to unease. Reed noticed, he always noticed. Talk to me. She hesitated. What if I'd made the wrong call? What if pushing through had gotten us killed? That's command, Grant, he said plainly. There's no safety net. Every choice feels like a coin toss, but you made the call and it was the right one. Your men lived. The SEALs lived. Their commander owes you his life. Don't let the what-ifs eat you alive. She wanted to believe him, but she still felt the tremor in her hands. That night wasn't the end of it. Reports were written, debriefs held. Elise sat in front of officers who praised her quick thinking, her precision, her refusal to break under fire. They spoke like it was a checklist of competence, but no one asked about the doubt that clawed at her when the shooting stopped. No one asked how it felt to carry the weight of a man whose blood soaked through her uniform. 2 weeks later, news filtered back from the medevac hospital. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Hayes had survived, multiple surgeries, months of recovery ahead, but he was alive. Alive because of her. Elise read the update in silence, a strange heaviness settling over her chest. Relief, yes, but also something else, something unexplainable. Her squad gathered around a metal table in the mess tent that night, voices loud with laughter, relief still lingering from their survival. Lopez recounted the firefight with dramatic flair, Walker argued about who had taken out the most insurgents, and Lane sat wide-eyed, still new enough to war that the shock hadn't fully left him. Elise smiled faintly, but her mind wasn't there. Sergeant, Walker's voice cut through her thoughts. You good? She blinked. Yeah, just tired. But she wasn't tired. She was restless, haunted by questions that had no place in a ranger's head. Why did saving this one man feel different? Why did she keep hearing his voice in the back of her mind? Weeks stretched into months. Missions came and went, each one brutal in its own way. Elise did her job, always steady, always prepared. But she carried that single day with her like a shadow. She didn't hear from him again. Not then, not while he healed. But Daniel Hayes thought of her often. He woke in sterile rooms filled with antiseptic smells, his body wired with tubes, pain a constant companion. Doctors and nurses came and went, their words blurring into background noise. But every time his mind drifted, it went back to the battlefield, to the sudden roar of rangers breaking through the fire, to the woman who had dropped beside him, calm under chaos. Her voice steady, assured, "Sir, we're pulling everyone, and that means you." Daniel had led men into hell more times than he could count. He had trusted comrades with his life, but never before had someone carried him, quite literally, out of death's grasp. 8 months later, he was cleared for light duty. He stood in front of a mirror, uniform crisp again, body scarred but whole. He owed his survival to her, and he knew he couldn't just let that debt vanish into silence. The call came on a quiet afternoon for Elise. She was back stateside in between deployments, visiting family she hadn't seen in years. The phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. "Staff Sergeant Grant," a voice asked. She froze. She knew that voice. She had only heard it in fragments of pain, but she knew. "This is Commander Hayes," he said. "I don't know if you remember me, but—" "Of course I remember," she cut in softly. There was a pause, almost like he was smiling through the line. "I wanted to say thank you. I owe you more than I can ever repay. But I was hopping. Maybe dinner could be a start." Her breath caught. Dinner, from the man whose life she had carried on her shoulders. Every instinct told her to keep distance. Soldiers didn't blur those lines. But something inside her, something she couldn't ignore, whispered, "Don't shut this door." "I'd like that," she said quietly. When she hung up, her reflection in the window startled her. She was smiling. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something else. The pull of a story unfinished. Dinner was simple. No uniforms, no weapons, just two people who had seen too much of war, sitting across from each other in a quiet restaurant. Conversation flowed awkwardly at first, then naturally. They spoke of service, of sacrifice, of the nights that weighed heavier than days. They found themselves laughing at small memories no civilian would understand. And Elise realized something unexpected. Daniel wasn't just a commander, not just the man she had saved. He was human, vulnerable, and he saw her not only as a ranger but as Elise, a woman who had carried him through fire. Still, she kept a wall around her heart. She had seen too many soldiers lost, too many bonds broken by distance, deployment, or death. She couldn't afford to let herself hope for something fragile. But Daniel wasn't deterred. He didn't rush. He didn't press. He simply kept showing up, a call here, a message there, quiet persistence that chipped at her defenses. And with each meeting, each conversation, she began to see it. The possibility that what had started in chaos could grow into something steady. Yet even as that hope flickered, Elise wrestled with an unshakable fear. What if war takes him again? The battlefield had given her the strength to save lives, but it had also taught her the cruelty of chance. No matter how skilled, how prepared, there were no guarantees. She could not bear to lose someone she allowed herself to care for. One night, sitting alone with a glass of untouched whiskey, she whispered the question into the empty room. Can love survive war? She didn't know the answer, not yet. But she was about to find out. Why did she hesitate before answering the phone? The screen lit up with his name, Daniel Hayes. She, spoken to him dozens of times since that first dinner, yet every call brought the same pause, the same flutter of unease, like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite see. She wasn't afraid of him. No, she was afraid of what was growing between them. Elise Grant had built her life on discipline, on control, on carrying burdens others could not. But this was different. This was fragile, and fragile things had no place in war. Still she answered, "Daniel." His voice, warm and steady, carried through the line. "Just checking in. How's Ranger life treating you this week?" She smiled faintly. Same as always. Early mornings, late nights, miles of running, and the occasional reminder that sleep is optional. He chuckled, glad to know some things never change. Then his tone softened. "I wish I could see you." The silence that followed said more than words. He was deployed again. She was training. Their worlds never aligned easily, but the connection remained, threads stretched across continents, unbroken. It wasn't easy. Distance gnawed at her, not knowing if his voice on the other end would be cut off by fate, by war, by silence. Every soldier's partner knew that fear, but Elise wasn't just a partner. She was a soldier too, and she knew too well what could happen out there. That knowledge haunted her. Some nights she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the weight of his body across her shoulders, the warmth of blood soaking into her uniform. She had saved him once, but could she save him again? Could anyone? The war didn't pause for love. Her next deployment came suddenly, orders handed down, bags packed, the familiar rhythm of leaving behind anything that resembled normal life. She didn't tell Daniel right away. She couldn't. The words stuck in her throat, heavy as stone. When she finally did, his silence was telling. "How long?" he asked. "6 months," she answered. He exhaled slowly. "Then I'll be counting every day." She wanted to say me too. Instead, she said, "Stay safe." Deployment blurred into repetition. Patrols, security checks, moments of danger that spiked without warning. Her squad looked to her, trusted her, followed her into shadows. But her mind often drifted back to him. She caught herself once, crouched behind a wall during a firefight, thinking not of angles or return fire but of Daniel's smile, his voice, his hand brushing hers across a table. The thought nearly cost her focus. When the firefight ended, when silence fell heavy again, she sat alone and whispered a curse under her breath. "You can't do this, Elise. You can't split yourself in two." Yet she already had. Letters helped. Short notes scribbled during rare quiet moments carried across oceans, each word a lifeline. Daniel's handwriting, strong and deliberate, spoke of longing and patience. Elise's replies were shorter, guarded, but beneath her clipped words lay emotions she was still afraid to admit. One evening, after a brutal 12-hour mission, she unfolded one of his letters under the dim light of a tent lantern. "Elise, you carried me through fire once. You might never know what that did to me, not just saving my life but showing me a kind of strength I've never seen before. That strength pulled me through recovery. It still pulls me now. I think of you when the nights stretch too long. I don't know if that's fair to say, but it's true." Her throat tightened. She read the letter 3 times, tracing the ink as though it were his hand. And for the first time in months, she let herself believe in something fragile. But war had no mercy for fragile things. News came one night Daniel's team had engaged in a high-risk operation. Details were scarce, only whispers through channels she wasn't supposed to hear. Elise tried to focus on her own mission, but the thought of him out there clawed at her nerves. Every time the radio crackled, her chest seized. Every time her squad returned fire, she felt his absence like a wound. Finally, the update reached her. The mission was successful. His team was alive. Relief flooded her, sharp and overwhelming. She had to step outside, away from her squad, to breathe. Her hands shook as she leaned against a wall, whispering to herself, "You're not supposed to care this much. Not like this." But she did. Her next call with him was different. She didn't tell him how close she had been to breaking down, but he heard it in her voice anyway. "Elise," he said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone." She swallowed hard. "I've carried everything alone, my whole career." "Then let me carry something with you." She closed her eyes. The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside her. The weeks turned into months, and when her deployment ended, Daniel was waiting. Not in uniform, not with ceremony, just a man standing in the arrivals hall, eyes searching until they found hers. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Two soldiers, scarred, weary, and yet somehow stronger. Then she stepped forward, and his arms wrapped around her, steady and unyielding. It wasn't passion, it wasn't desperation, it was relief, it was belonging. For the first time, Elise allowed herself to believe. They began to carve out moments in between duty, stolen weekends, brief visits, quiet dinners where the weight of war slipped away. But beneath every laugh, every touch lay the unspoken truth. Their lives were still the military, still danger, still separation. And Elise knew something she hadn't said aloud. The deeper she fell, the more she feared the day one of them wouldn't come back. One night, as rain drummed softly against a window, Daniel spoke the words she had avoided. "Elise, what if this isn't just chance? What if that day in the desert, what if it meant something?" She looked at him, heart pounding. It meant survival. No, he said gently, it meant us. She wanted to believe. She wanted to let the walls fall, but fear kept her anchored. Instead, she whispered, then promise me something. Anything. Promise me if war takes one of us, the other keeps living, keeps fighting. His eyes softened, sorrow flickering in them. I promise. But deep down, Elise wondered if either of them truly could. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? The base had been hit hard that morning. Mortar fire tearing through the perimeter, alarms wailing, dust clouds swallowing the air. Elise and her squad had fought back with precision, moving like clockwork under her commands. They had survived. The base had held, but survival came with a price. Specialist Lane, the youngest of her squad, barely 20. He had been with her since his first deployment, eager, nervous, always looking to prove himself. Lane didn't walk away that day. Elise sat outside the medical tent hours later, his blood still on her gloves, staring at the horizon as the sun bled red across the valley. The war didn't pause for grief. Orders still echoed, radios still crackled, but inside her chest a storm raged. She had told herself she could carry the weight of her men. That leadership meant bearing their losses in silence. But now, sitting alone, she wondered if silence was a lie. Grant, Marcus Reed's voice broke through, low and steady. He sat beside her, not asking permission, just present. Her jaw clenched. I should have seen it coming, I should have. You couldn't have, Reed cut her off. You did everything right, we all know the risks. She looked at him, eyes burning. Then why does it feel like I failed him? Because she cared. Because no amount of training could erase the humanity inside her. And because every soldier lost left a scar, invisible but permanent. That night when the base quieted, she called Daniel. She hadn't planned to. She didn't even know what she wanted to say. But when his voice answered, something inside her broke. Elise, his tone sharpened instantly. What happened? She swallowed hard, words caught in her throat. Finally, she whispered, I lost one of mine today. Silent, then softly, I'm sorry. The way he said it, not as a commander, not as someone trained to process casualty reports, but as a man who understood grief, pierced through her defenses. He was just a kid, she murmured. I keep thinking if I'd made a different call. Elise, his voice was firm now. Don't do that to yourself. You've carried me through fire. You've saved lives I'll never forget, but you can't save everyone. No one can. Her chest tightened. So what do we do with the ones we lose? He was quiet for a moment. Then, we remember, we carry them with us. And we keep going, because if we stop, then their sacrifice means nothing. Tears slipped down her cheeks silently. She hated crying, hated feeling weak. But Daniel didn't rush her, didn't try to fill the silence. He just stayed on the line, breathing with her until the storm eased. It was in that silence that Elise realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, she had someone who understood the weight, who didn't flinch from it. Their bond deepened in the shadows of loss. Weeks later, during a rare break in deployment cycles, they met again. This time not in uniform, not under the weight of orders, but as two people desperate for something steady. They walked along a quiet trail, trees whispering above, the world blessedly distant from war. Elise carried the loss of Lane with her still, but with Daniel beside her, it didn't feel as crushing. You still blame yourself, he said gently, reading her like he always could. She didn't answer at first, then she whispered, I don't know how to stop. He stopped walking, turning to face her. You don't stop, you just learn to live with it, and maybe if you let yourself, you learn to live for them. Her eyes met his. For a moment the weight lifted. But war always pulled them back. Daniel's next mission came sooner than expected. High risk, details classified. Elise didn't ask, she knew better. But the night before he left, he held her hand and said, I'll come back, I promise. Promises in war were fragile things. Elise knew it, He knew it, but they clung to it anyway. While he was gone, Elise poured herself into her squad, into training, into making sure no more young soldiers slipped through her fingers. But in the quiet hours, she found herself praying, not something she often did, for Daniel's safe return. When the message finally came, relief and sorrow collided. Daniel's team had succeeded. The mission was complete, but one of his men hadn't made it back. When she spoke to him afterward, his voice was heavy. "I carried him, Elise," he said quietly. "The way you carried me, but I couldn't save him." Her heart ached at the familiar pain in his words. "It's not your fault," she said, echoing the words he had once given her. "Doesn't feel that way," he admitted. In that moment, she understood something deeper. War didn't just take lives. It carved wounds into the living, mirrored scars in those who survived. She and Daniel were bound not just by affection, but by shared grief, by the weight of responsibility no civilian could truly grasp. It wasn't romance in the ordinary sense. It was survival, two souls clinging to each other in the storm, finding light where they could. One evening, after another long stretch apart, they sat together on a quiet bench overlooking the Hudson River. Daniel's recovery was complete, his career still demanding. Elise was preparing for advanced training, her own path steepening. He reached into his pocket, fingers trembling slightly. "Elise," he said, voice low, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if war will tear us apart tomorrow or next year. But I know this, I want whatever time we're given to be spent together." Her breath caught, the box opened. A ring glinted faintly under the fading light. For a heartbeat she froze. Images of Lane, of every soldier she had lost, of Daniel bleeding in the dirt, of promises broken by war. Her instinct was to protect herself, to keep walls high, but then she remembered his words, "Learn to live for them." And she realized something. Maybe saying yes wasn't just about love. Maybe it was about defiance, a refusal to let war take everything. Her eyes met his, steady and fierce. "Yes," she whispered. The river moved quietly below. The city lights flickered on. And for the first time, Elise allowed herself to believe that love could stand, even in the shadow of war. Why did joy feel so dangerous? Elise had said yes. She had slipped the ring onto her finger, felt its weight, and for a fleeting moment believed in something stronger than war. But almost immediately, a shadow followed the joy. Because in her world, every promise was fragile, every tomorrow uncertain. The engagement spread quickly through their circles. Rangers congratulated her with firm handshakes and quiet pride. SEALs teased Daniel with jokes about finally finding someone who could outshoot him. Their families reacted with cautious relief, grateful but fearful, knowing the risks that still lay ahead. But Elise, she felt the pressure building. Every time she looked at the ring, she thought, what if this ends the way so many stories do, with folded flags and silence? She didn't say it aloud. She couldn't. Instead, she threw herself into work, advanced training courses, leadership drills, endless hours hunting skills that already bordered on perfection. If she could just stay sharp, if she could just prepare enough, maybe she could keep the darkness at bay. Daniel saw it in her eyes when they met. He saw the way her smiles never quite reached all the way she stiffened when conversations turned toward the future. One night, while walking together after a long day, he finally stopped and faced her. "Elise," he said softly, "you're carrying this like it's another mission, but love isn't something you win by being stronger." Her jaw tightened. "Strength is all I know." "Then maybe it's time to learn something else," he whispered. She looked away, heart pounding. Could she trust something she couldn't control? Their time together was brief. Duty pulled at them relentlessly. Daniel returned to operations overseas. Elise pushed deeper into Ranger training, chosen for advanced small unit leadership courses. Their paths crossed in moments, not stretches, stolen time instead of steady days. Yet even in separation, their bond grew. Letters became longer, calls became softer, and both of them carried an unspoken vow to hold on to this fragile thing no matter how the war tried to strip it away. Then came the mission that tested them more than any before. Elise's unit was sent into Raven Rock Valley again, the same harsh terrain where she had first pulled Daniel from the brink. Intelligence suggested insurgent leaders were regrouping, rebuilding networks that could strike American forces harder than before. The orders were clear: find them, disrupt them, deny them ground. The valley was cruel. Heat shimmered off jagged ridges by day, freezing winds cut through at night. Her squad moved like ghosts, navigating ravines and ridgelands, always aware that every rock, every shadow could conceal death. Days into the mission, they walked into an ambush. It wasn't as devastating as the one that had nearly killed Daniel, but it was enough. Gunfire erupted from concealed positions. Mortars rained down. Elise's squad scattered for cover, returning fire in controlled bursts. "Contact front 50 meters," Walker shouted. "Suppress and flank," Elise ordered, crawling through dust, her rifle steady despite the chaos. She felt the familiar shift, the world narrowing, time slowing, every sense sharpened. But beneath the focus, fear stirred. Not for herself, for her squad, for the possibility that she'd have to call another family, write another letter home. They fought hard, breaking the ambush with disciplined aggression. By the time the last shot faded, 3 enemy fighters lay dead, and the rest melted into the terrain. None of her squad were killed, though Lopez carried shrapnel in his leg, gritting his teeth through the pain. When it was over, Elise crouched in the silence, breathing hard. Dust clung to her skin, sweat burning her eyes. And the thought hit her again, brutal and unrelenting: this will never end. Not for me. Not for Daniel. Not for anyone who chooses this life. That night, as her squad set a perimeter, Elise sat alone under the stars. She pulled off her glove, staring at the ring. It glinted faintly, fragile and defiant against the darkness. She whispered into the silence, "Can I protect this? Can I protect him?" The stars gave no answer. When she returned from the mission weeks later, Daniel was waiting stateside. His team had been rotated back for a brief respite. Their reunion was quiet but charged, each moment carrying the weight of everything unsaid. That evening, she told him about the ambush, about the fear that had gripped her chest when she thought she might lose more of her men, about the doubt that never left her. Daniel listened, eyes steady, letting her words spill out. When she finally fell silent, he said, "Elise, you're not alone in this fight. You never were. I carry the same fear every time I go out, but we can't let it stop us from living. Otherwise, war wins twice." His words sank deep, but still, she struggled to let go of the walls around her heart. One weekend, they attended a joint ceremony honoring soldiers and sailors who had distinguished themselves in service. Both stood in uniform, medals shining, surrounded by comrades who had bled with them in foreign lands. When the announcer spoke of courage under fire, Elise felt eyes on her, recognition, respect. Her rescue of Daniel had become more than a memory. It was now part of the fabric of their military community. As the applause faded, Daniel leaned close and whispered, "They see what I see, the strength that saved me." She looked at him, at the quiet pride in his gaze, and something shifted. Maybe love wasn't about walls. Maybe it was about trust, about letting someone else see the scars and stay anyway. Still, the shadow of the future loomed. They were engaged, yes, but marriage meant more than vows. It meant building something fragile in a world designed to shatter it. One night, Elise stood before a mirror, dress uniform folded neatly on the chair, ring gleaming on her finger. She studied her reflection, the hardened soldier staring back at her. She whispered to the glass, "You've led men into fire, you've carried the wounded, you've buried the fallen, but can you carry love the same way?" Her reflection gave no answer, but deep inside a spark flickered, a spark of hope. When Daniel called that night, she didn't hesitate before answering. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she replied, smiling faintly. And for the first time, she felt ready to believe that maybe, just maybe, joy wasn't as dangerous as she feared. Why did the thought of walking down the aisle feel more terrifying than walking into a firefight? Elise had faced ambushes, mortar fire, and battles that left scars both visible and hidden. But standing in front of a mirror in a quiet room, holding a simple white dress against her frame, her chest tightened in a way combat never had. This was different. This wasn't about orders or missions or survival. This was about choice, about love, about hope, and hope had always been the most dangerous battlefield of all. Daniel's proposal had been simple, earnest, stripped of ceremony, but the preparation for their wedding pulled them into a world that felt almost foreign. Guest lists, venues, invitations, things Elise had never let herself imagine. At night when she lay awake, she wondered, what if we build this life and war rips it apart before it begins? The thought was relentless. Every time she smiled, every time she laughed with Daniel, every time she traced the ring with her thumb, the fear crept in. Yet she never spoke it aloud. Their families tried to bridge the gap between normal and extraordinary. Her parents, proud but nervous, asked if she was ready to balance marriage and combat tour. Daniel's family welcomed her with warmth, but Elise saw the worry in their eyes. They knew what it meant to love a man who belonged to the battlefield. Her squad surprised her with a gathering one evening. Lopez joked about how they'd have to keep Daniel in line. Walker presented her with a ranger tab cut from cloth, sewn into a garter as a prank. For the first time in weeks, Elise laughed freely. But when the laughter faded, she found herself staring into the dark, wondering if her squad would all be there when she returned from the next deployment. Preparations moved quickly. The ceremony was set at West Point, inside the same chapel that had hosted countless military unions over generations. The symbolism mattered to them both, a place of history, sacrifice, and service. On the day itself, the air was crisp, sunlight streaming through stained glass, illuminating uniforms polished to perfection. Rows of SEALs and Rangers filled the pews, men and women who had walked through hell with them, comrades who understood the weight of vows spoken under the shadow of war. Elise stood just outside the chapel doors, heart hammering. The dress felt strange, as though she was wearing someone else's skin. She had spent years in camouflage, boots, body armor. This felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't prepared for. Her father touched her arm gently. "You're ready," he whispered. She swallowed. "Am I?" He smiled faintly. "You've carried more than most could ever bear. This is just letting someone share the load." The doors opened. Gasps rippled softly through the chapel as Elise stepped inside, the aisle stretching long before her. Daniel stood at the altar, dress uniform immaculate, eyes locked on hers. In that moment the fear faded, not gone but quiet, because he was there, because they were there together. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, not toward battle, not toward fire, but toward a future she never thought she'd allow herself to want. The vows were simple, spoken with steady voices that carried the weight of everything unspoken. Deployments, separations, the possibility of loss. They didn't need flowery promises. They needed truth. "I vow to stand with you no matter the cost," Daniel said, voice thick with emotion. "I vow to carry you as you carried me," Elise replied, her hands trembling slightly in his. When they exchanged rings, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Even hardened warriors who had seen too much of death felt the rawness of that moment, love defying the battlefield. The reception that followed was filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of camaraderie only forged under fire. Lopez delivered a speech so riddled with jokes that Elise nearly spilled her drink. Walker spoke with quiet pride about following her into danger, and how Daniel should count himself lucky to follow her into life. But the most meaningful moment came when Marcus Reed, Her old platoon sergeant raised his glass. Elise Grant carried men out of fire without hesitation, he said. Today, she carries something even greater. Daniel, you already know what kind of strength you've married. And Elise, you finally allowed yourself to be carried too. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Silence followed, not awkward, reverent. Elise blinked back tears, humbled by words she didn't know how to answer. Later, when the crowd thinned and the music softened, she and Daniel stole a quiet moment outside beneath the stars. The night was cool, the world hushed. Daniel slipped his hand into hers. "We did it," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "Feels unreal." He looked at her, eyes steady. "War will still come, missions will still take us away, but tonight proves something. We can still choose this. We can still choose us." She leaned into him, letting the weight of his words settle. Maybe that was the lesson. Not that war would spare them, but that love could exist despite it. And as they stood together, newly bound by vows, Elise realized something profound. Strength wasn't only in carrying rifles, in making impossible calls under fire. Strength was also in letting herself hope, in building something fragile and daring the world to break it. Her reflection whispered softly in her mind, the one that had haunted her before the wedding. Can you carry love the same way you carry war? Now holding Daniel's hand, she had her answer. Yes. Why did home feel like a temporary station, not a destination? Elise and Daniel were married now. Rings on their fingers, vows etched into memory, photographs capturing smiles that looked almost free of war. But freedom was an illusion. Their home together was real, yes, a small townhouse with bare walls slowly filling with traces of them. But looming over every quiet breakfast, every shared night was the same truth. The military always called them back. They tried to carve out normalcy. Elise cooked sometimes, awkwardly, laughing when Daniel teased her about burning rice. Daniel built a shelf in the living room, hands clumsy with tools better suited for weapons than nails. They spent evenings sitting close on the couch, talking about everything except deployments. But silence always slipped in, the silence of when will you leave again. One morning, Elise woke before dawn, her body still wired for early patrols. She lay there, staring at Daniel asleep beside her, his breathing steady. She touched his hand gently, afraid to wake him. How many more mornings like this will I get? She wondered. The answer came sooner than she wanted. Orders, another mission, high risk. Daniel would be gone for months. He told her gently, as though soft words could dull the sting. She listened, jaw tight, nodding because she understood, because she was a soldier too. But inside, something rebelled. Why can't we just be normal? Why can't we just have time? The night before he left, they sat together in silence. Daniel finally spoke, his hand gripping hers. "I'll come back, I promise." She wanted to believe. She wanted to let those words soothe her, but she had buried too many soldiers who once promised the same. "Just come back," she whispered, voice breaking. And then he was gone. Elise returned to her own duties. Ranger life didn't pause for anyone. She drilled her squad, trained recruits, prepared for missions of her own. She kept her face steady, her tone sharp. But when the barracks emptied at night, the silence pressed down. Letters came, short but filled with life. Daniel wrote of foreign streets, of long nights planning, of his men and their steady resolve. He didn't write of the dangers, but she could read between the lines. Every careful word screamed of risks he couldn't name. She wrote back less often, her words guarded. She wanted to protect him from her own fears, but she also feared writing them down would make them too real. One evening, as rain tapped against her window, Elise unfolded one of his letters again. "Elise, I think of you every time the night stretches too long. I remind myself of your strength, of the fire in your eyes when you carried me. I hold on to that because it reminds me what's waiting for me back home. I love you, not because you saved me, but because you keep saving me even now." Her throat tightened. She pressed the paper to her chest, eyes closing. But then came the silence, days without letters, weeks without word. She told herself it was just operations, just missions keeping him from writing, but dread grew like a shadow inside her. The phone call came late one night. Elise Grant, the voice was official, measured. Her heart stopped. "This is Commander Daniel Hayes' unit. He's alive but injured. The mission took heavy fire. He's being stabilized and will be transported for recovery." Alive but injured. Her knees buckled. She sat heavily on the edge of her bed, the phone pressed to her ear, her body trembling. Relief and terror clashed inside her chest. She whispered, "Thank you," before the line disconnected. Memories of that first rescue flooded back. Him bleeding in the dirt, his eyes fatting, her carrying him through fire, and now again. She wanted to be there to lift him herself, to drag him back into life. But this time she couldn't. She had to wait. Weeks passed, updates trickled in. He was stable, healing, still strong. And finally, the day came when she saw him again. He walked toward her slowly, still bandaged, leaning heavier on one leg but alive. Alive. When their eyes met, all the walls she had built crumbled. She ran to him, arms wrapping tight, head buried against his chest. His hand trembled as it pressed against her back. "I told you I'd come back," he murmured. She pulled away, tears streaking her face. "Don't you ever make me wait like that again." He smiled faintly, pain flickering in his expression but warmth steady in his gaze. "Then don't ever doubt me again." They stood there, both scarred, both weary but together. That night, as they sat side by side, Elise realized something she had been too afraid to admit. Love wasn't about promises of safety. It was about choosing someone even when safety didn't exist. Marriage in the military wasn't fragile because of war. It was strong because of it. Every moment mattered more. Every laugh carried weight. Every touch was a victory against the silence. Later, Daniel leaned against her shoulder, voice low. "One day, we'll step away from all this. One day, it'll just be you and me." She looked at him, at the scars etched into his skin, at the tired strength in his eyes. "And until then." He smiled faintly. "Until then, we fight together." She nodded, because for the first time, the word together felt like armor. Why did quiet moments feel the rarest gift of all? Months had passed since Daniel's injury, months of recovery, therapy, and strength slowly rebuilt. Elise stayed close when she could, balancing her own duties with his healing. They learned to live with the rhythm of hospital visits, the patience of waiting, the gratitude of simply being able to sit together in silence. When he finally walked again without assistance, Elise watched with tears she didn't bother to hide. He grinned at her, sweat dripping down his temple, determination blazing in his eyes. "I told you I'd get back on my feet," he said breathlessly. "You always do," she whispered. Life returned to its pattern, not normal, never normal but theirs. They shared nights at home, mornings that felt borrowed, and the constant knowledge that duty could still call at any moment. And it did. Orders came for Elise, a mission deep into contested territory, longer and harsher than anything she had faced since the rescue that had first tied them together. Daniel had been reassigned to lighter duty, his body not fully cleared for combat. For the first time, she would leave while he stayed behind. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had once carried him to safety. Now he had to carry the silence, the waiting, the fear. The night before she left, they sat together on the floor of their home, uniforms folded neatly nearby, candles flickering softly. Daniel held her hand tightly, unwilling to let go. "Elise," he said, voice low, "I can't follow you this time. I can't be there to cover your six, and I hate it." She squeezed his hand. "You've carried me before. You carry me every day, even when you don't see it." He shook his head. "Just promise me you'll come back." Her eyes locked on his. "I can't promise that, you know I can't." Pain flickered across his face, but he didn't look away. "What I can promise," she continued softly, "is that I'll fight with everything I have. And if I don't come back, you keep living. You carry both of us." He swallowed hard, then pulled her into his arms. They stayed like that for a long time, breathing each other in, memorizing every heartbeat. The mission was brutal. Weeks of grinding movement through hostile terrain, firefights that tore through the night, ambushes that tested every ounce of her training. Elise led with calm ferocity, her squad moving like an extension of her will. But inside she carried Daniel's face, his voice, his hand holding hers in the quiet. There were close calls, too many. One night, pinned down by sniper fire, Elise pressed herself against the dirt and thought, "If this is it, at least I loved." But it wasn't the end. Not yet. Her squad fought through, mission complete, every soldier returning. When the helicopter finally lifted them away, Elise stared at the horizon, exhaustion weighing her bones. And for the first time in her career, she thought not of the next mission, not of the next order, but of home. Weeks later, when she finally stepped off the plane, Daniel was there, waiting. Stronger now, his recovery nearly complete, eyes locked on her as though nothing else existed. She dropped her pack, ran into his arms, and for a moment the world disappeared. They didn't speak much that first night back. They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. "I made it. You waited. We're still here." In the years that followed, they continued to serve. Missions came and went. Deployments separated them. But through it all, their bond deepened, forged in fire, tested by distance, strengthened by choice. Friends who had fought beside them often said their love story was unbelievable, a tale better suited for novels than reality. But Elise and Daniel knew the truth. It wasn't about heroics. It wasn't about fairy tale-ese. It was about survival, about carrying each other when one couldn't stand, about choosing hope again and again, even when the world tried to strip it away. On their anniversary one year, Daniel asked her, "Do you ever think back to that day? The day you found me in the dirt?" Elise smiled faintly. "Every time I look at you." "And do you regret it, charging through all that fire?" She shook her head. "No, because saving you saved me too. It gave me something worth fighting for beyond the uniform." He kissed her hand, eyes shining with quiet pride. "Then maybe that's the real mission." Elise thought of all they had endured, the losses, the scars, the weight of leadership and the burden of survival, and she realized something profound. The battlefield had taught her many things: tactics, discipline, resilience. But love had taught her something greater, that sometimes the strongest act wasn't firing a weapon or holding the line or carrying the wounded. Sometimes the strongest act was allowing herself to be vulnerable, to be seen, to let someone else carry her too. Years later, as they stood together at another ceremony, medals gleaming, comrades gathered, flags waving, Elise felt Daniel's hand slip into hers. The crowd applauded, but she barely heard it. All she felt was the steady warmth of the man who had once been her mission, now her partner, always her anchor. And in that moment, she understood the truth she had been chasing all along. War might shape them, duty might define them, but love was what made them whole. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Sometimes strength isn't shouted. It's carried quietly, in the way two soldiers hold onto each other, refusing to let go. And sometimes, the greatest rescue of all isn't pulling someone from the jaws of death. It's saving each other, day after day, in the quiet battles no one else sees.